So, Dane, you and I were talking via email about your book, your novel that you're working on called Formerly.
Yeah.
And it's from what I gathered, it's about a social network where people enter information or when they're alive, and then after they die, the information goes public. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's basically the concept. So it's a bit, if you imagine it like a private version of Facebook or like a private blog. So you can almost keep a sort of online diary that's completely private and only you can see it. And then after you die, it then goes live to the public.
So, what inspired that idea? Where did that come from? What was the moment that it struck your brain?
Well, so as a career, I work in social media marketing for a marketing agency. So, and I think everyone always says you should write about what you know, and I've done a lot of writing in the past as well. But I kind of had this idea, I should write about what I know. So then I started thinking, well, what do I know about? I know a lot about social networking sites, but not just how to use them, but how they're run and how they're founded as well. Um, and so I kind of wanted to do something with that. And then I tried to think of quite a wacky idea as well, because I didn't want it just to be some quite a boring, just a photo social network or something like that. I wanted to do something that is so crazy that it could only really happen in fiction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I think what's appealing about the concept is that it actually might appeal to some people. Like some people might actually want to do that.
Yeah, well that's the thing, because I suppose that the good thing about that is then it gives you the freedom. Once you've got this concept, it's like, okay, well, what would people then use this social network for? And actually, for the planning stage of the novel was quite easy, because again, in terms of my knowledge of how sort of social networks work, it was really easy to think, what would this company do? And it's like, right, well, they're gonna need to worry about how to make money out of it. So how would they do that? And so I kind of came up with this idea that they'd release a feature where you can kind of you can leave like virtual wreaths and stuff, and you can donate through to charities to support to fight the cause of death and all this kind of thing. But then it was also looking at the other way around of what people would put on the social network. So you've got, people who are kind of secretly having an affair, and they want to leave a message to kind of clear the air and things like that. And then again, I was thinking, well, what happens then after they die? And obviously you then have a backlash from the loved ones against the social network, even though it's not necessarily their fault. They have nothing to do with what the people are being putting on it. So that's kind of how that all evolved. But the main story actually follows the employees of the social network. So you only kind of hear about these stories in I suppose, a second-hand way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question: is who's the protagonist of this story?
Yeah. So the protagonist is a web developer called Dan, and he keeps a journal, just a general sort of day-to-day journal, and that's actually it turns out to be a plot device in the story as well. I won't say how, just obviously don't want to ruin it, but so he's the protagonist, but there's actually the 6 core employees of the company are the 6 main characters, and then they start off small and they grow and more people come in, but it still focuses on these 6 employees.
Is there some kind of mystery that evolves, or can you not tell us that
much? I can tell you how it evolves. I can't tell you how it's resolved. Partly because again I'm about 2/3 of the way through writing it, but as we were saying in my interview with you, actually, the characters quite often do take on minds of their own, and although I've planned it all out, it does keep changing in little bits, which will be interesting to say the least when I go back through and edit it all. Especially because I've done a bit of foreshadowing and kind of set the scene for later events, and then realised, hang on a minute, this wouldn't actually happen, and so I've had to then take those bits out. But coming back to the mystery, basically, there's just this feeling that something isn't right in the company, and actually Dan, the main character, he knows this, and although he's one of the early employees, there's a lot that the 2 founders don't share with him. And one of the things they don't share is how they actually know that people are dying. And
Mm.
it does get revealed near the end how they get that information. But there's also there's just something about them that none of the employees really trust, and it kind of comes out like that. But also, a couple of the employees of the company start to die as well. But actually, they have their office broken into about a third of the way through, and they're kind of step up security. And the two founders are very secretive, and it's revealed at the end what the cause of that was as well.
So would you say that it fits into the thriller genre?
It's a bit of a weird one, actually. I think that's probably the closest one it is. I mean, the thing with myself is that, again, I read quite a lot of different genres. So there are a few bits of sort of black humor in there. It probably is mainly thriller as well. But again, what I've tried to do is I've tried to keep it quite realistic as well, and there are kind of bits of it in there for everybody. So actually, as well, because I work with a lot of web developers at work as well, and I know quite a lot about the industry. I've even done sort of bits in the dialogue that you'd probably appreciate more if you were a web developer as well, because it's you know what I mean. Otherwise you'd be like, I don't know what that means. So which is not vital to the story, but I think it's kind of quite a nice little nod to those kind of characters.
Yeah. Well, so what parallels, or what are some of the parallels that you see between the fictional social media that you have, well, not developed, but that you're writing about, and the social media, or the social networks, I should say, that we already use?
Well, in some ways, I mean, again, one of the things I had to do was think, well, how would this site actually work? So the way that the site actually works, and it's never, there's never any kind of boring bit in the text where it just goes, this is how it works, and explains it. But here and there, there's kind of, it refers to different features of it. But it's quite a lot like Facebook in terms of, you can leave a message of condolence on someone's profile, for example. In terms of, again, the way they make money from it as well, that's very much based on how kind of current social networks try and make money out of their users as well. One thing that they do also launch, which is based on Tumblr, actually, they do this, I think, and that you can advertise on the site, but it doesn't go onto the profiles, it goes onto the dashboards. So the living people, before they pass away and their profile goes live, as they log in to update it, then they're exposed to adverts as well. So, and again, because that was also thinking, in this position as a social network, you wouldn't put adverts on profiles of dead people because that's massively disrespectful. But what you can do is you can advertise to them before they're dead, if that makes sense. And just in terms of
that makes sense.
And in terms of how they get their funding as well, so they get investment from angel investors, and then that allows them to relocate their office. And in terms of how they start out as well, there's actually during the novel there are 2 office moves. So they start out just in someone's living room, and then they get a proper office, and they start out in London, and then they move to Palo Alto in America, which is it's the Silicon Valley of social networking sites, basically. So it's like I said, it's very much, it's basically, if I was running a social network, what would I do with it?
Right, yeah. Well, so I hear that there are a lot of parallels in terms of how these companies develop, and also in sort of the technical aspects of running it. And it also, based on what you said earlier, it sounds like another parallel is that sometimes the end users use the program in a slightly different way than the developers had thought about it to begin with. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually, again, quite often the developers will then kind of factor in these ways that people have used it, and use that to kind of inform new features as well. But again, because I think one of the interesting things is you see it from the eyes of the team developing it, and you hear stories about individual users, but you never actually kind of get to use it as a user yourself. And the team actually has quite a bad attitude towards the users, and it's almost like they feel without the users it would be a lot easier to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which I think was probably an attitude shared by a lot of people things like Facebook and Twitter as well, because people keep breaking it and they're always having to deal, with taking down pages that have caused offence and that kind of thing. And actually, one of the early hires in the company is a woman who comes in and she does their in-house PR basically, because again they're having a lot of both positive and negative PR, and they're quite a controversial social network, and that helps them to get lots of users, and actually they have a lot of like huge boosts in the number of signups whenever a negative news story goes out, because people hear about it and think, oh, what's this, but it's quite important for a social network like that to actually have somebody working inside and communicating with journalists and that kind of thing.
Well, and so the kind of the big meaty question that I have, and because you've described the plot and you've described how it came about, but what are some of the sort of social, political, maybe economic themes from actual life that you're exploring in this? Like, what's it about, like, on that sort of deeper human level?
I suppose in some ways it's about human nature. I mean, again, with most of my writing, there's usually quite a dark undertone to it in some way, and quite often, again, with the things that the users do, a lot of the publicity that they get is when someone's done something really bad, like they've died, and then afterwards it's come out that they killed someone when they were young or something. You never really get exposed to these happy stories, because actually that wouldn't necessarily make the news anyway. And they've got a lot of sort of personal demons and a lot of problems that come out during the novel. So I guess it's that kind of thing that even people who seem quite normal on the outside have usually got something on the inside that they don't necessarily want everybody to know.
What's your own level of comfort with public disclosure? I mean, could you envision using something like this, or?
I think that's an interesting question, and again, it's one that sort of on a professional level I find quite interesting. And I tend to find that sort of people of my generation, perhaps sort of under the age of 30 at the moment, that they've kind of grown up with the internet and are kind of quite comfortable with posting stuff. And actually, the younger people are, the more they tend to be willing to post stuff. But it's an interesting question. I think a lot of the reasons in which it actually works is that because none of it goes live until after you're dead, if that makes sense, people can post what they like about it because they're not too worried about, they're not going to be around to see the consequences of it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and when you were talking too about the I don't want to say these days. I'm only 35, but like the millennial generation, right? As you were saying, y'all are more comfortable with that kind of thing. But I'm thinking about the babies that are being born now, and their parents are posting photos of them every day to Facebook or whatever.
Yeah.
These kids are growing up not having any choice whatsoever
about
participating in social media. Yeah, because their parents are doing it for them on their behalf. So that it's a whole different world.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's an interesting one because I didn't want to give the message that it's necessarily bad to do that, but what I've tried to do is be quite even about it. It's like, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. You can, it's up to the reader to decide whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And I think you can actually enjoy reading the novel, whether you would necessarily use that service or not.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's any sort of conflict of interest for you to be writing this kind of book and working in social media? Just in terms of, I just mean in terms of you work in social media, and so it's your job to publicize these things and interact with people who are publishing these things. But then on the other hand, it sounds like the book you're writing is a little bit of a cautionary tale. Maybe not. Maybe that's too strong a word, because as you say, you try to be even about it, but exploring some of the real consequences of this kind of sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's a conflict of interest because again, I tried to keep it fairly unbiased. And actually, the work that I do is in social media marketing, and it's not as a marketer, you probably wouldn't use the formally, which is the social network in the novel, you probably wouldn't use that for marketing. Maybe use the ads, but that's about it. So from a professional level, I don't think it is, but I guess it can be quite difficult to be sort of even-handed about it. But again, because the plot follows the employees of the network, it's more of a human tale. I think the social network itself is almost the less important part of the novel. And again, because I kind of work, I mean, I don't work for a social network, but I work for, it's quite a small company, but they've got quite a strong sort of company culture. And I've actually used a lot of the things that we do in the office to sort of, this is what the company would do internally as well. So I think just the fact that I'm familiar with that area itself kind of helped me to write about it more convincingly. And I suppose you could say the same about, anyone who writes about anything. For example, whether an ex-soldier writing a military novel, whether they could then be biased, in favor of the military. I don't know. It's a tricky thing that I think most writers have to face.
Well, since you're using, it sounds like, I think earlier you said you use actual conversations, like things that people actually would say in these situations, or decisions that the company actually would make. Do you ever have a pang of anxiety about your coworkers reading it and feeling exposed?
No, I think I can get away with it. I think I've changed it enough so that I reckon one or two people might read it and be like, that sounds familiar, and know that it's about them, but I don't think it's too obvious, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more I suppose I don't think there's anything that's taken sort of directly from reality, but there's a lot that I could imagine people that I know or companies that I know doing that if they were in that situation. So it's more their approach rather than things they actually do, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, one more question if you have time.
Yeah, sure.
We'll just end on a similar note to your final question,
Mm-hmm.
but a little bit different. Do you have a favorite sci-fi thriller that you'd recommend to us?
That's a tough question. I mean, well, I'm just looking at my bookcases now. I'm actually, because I've just moved house, I'm in the process of unpacking and got over 1,000 books. So to pick a favorite is quite tricky. One I would give a shout out to though. It's more of a YA one as well, rather than a really deep, sort of thick adult book. But a good friend of mine called Imran Sadiq has written a book called Disconnect, and that's the first book in a trilogy. And actually, I was very impressed by that, and I'm really looking forward to the next ones coming out.
That's the one I think that you're holding in your.
Yes, it is. Yeah, in my picture. Yeah.